So my question is really about this Norse or Viking idea of going to Valhalla, or going to like a higher plane of existence through being a warrior, or through sacrifice, or through honor, by transmuting something within yourself, like an energy within yourself, your beingness to a higher plane, so that you can sort of live on forever, as some people like to think. And I think a lot of people like this idea that there are gods, and that you can become a god in some fashion. So what would you say are the truths and the delusions in this?
Well, you know, all of these ideas just already like sort of extras on the top of the idea that ancient people still remembered, say, 4,000 or 5,000 years ago, even though Kali Yuga had already started, they still remembered that the physical dimension was not the permanent dimension, and the experience in the physical dimension was just transitory experience. So we can see it in Egyptian cultures and ancient Greek cultures, but these cultures, or the information about these cultures or spiritual heritage is already sort of corrupt, because we know of them, say, existing for 5,000 years, thousands of years, 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. Indian culture, Chinese, I mean, these are just remnants of those great, sort of, if you may, civilizations or collective ways of existence which predated these cultures. So we can't imagine how developed those were and what level of technology they had. Yet the technology was not of a harming nature or environmentally polluting nature. And those okay, I will use the word civilizations, or civilizations existed with the remembrance and clear awareness of their subtle being. And so they employ their subtle being in their day-to-day lives while handling their physical being, or while handling certain aspects of their physical existence, like, for example, the construction of certain specific geomagnetic structures, or so everything was kind of a part of the organic existence on Earth, where the Earth, them, the subtle being of the Earth, they all kind of, creation in general, like, we're all aligned, right? So now in ancient cultures such as ancient Greece and Rome and ancient Orient, Asia, Nordic cultures still preserved these ideas about afterlife. So that's why somewhat they've created a cult of afterlife, because they started losing their touch with the subtle dimension. And so they started to see that, they need to make extra effort to be in touch with the subtle dimension, first of all. And second of all, that somewhat it becomes more and more difficult to maintain that awareness of the subtle dimension while alive, or only special people have that access, or only some beings still are connected and the other beings started being more and more disconnected. So they needed to make extra effort for that, so they created some rituals and concepts and kind of stories and ways to pass on this information to their further generations. And this remembrance sort of turned out to be more as mythical, kind of like a fairy tale rather than a reality at the end. So because initially there was direct experience, at least there were beings who still preserved that link with a subtle dimension. But with time, less and less beings were able to actually cross into the subtle or be connected with the subtle dimension. And so these stories or evidences became myths because there was no longer an evidence of being really in touch with those subtler dimensions or going into subtler dimensions, you see. So at the beginning, it was a normality to travel between dimensions, to exist between dimensions, to have only a limited function or a limited point in this projected reality. But with time and with more degradation and more sort of interest in the physical dimension and the emotional dimension of reality, we started withdrawing from the higher dimension into the physical dimension, into the matter, right? And dispersing within it. And so we started losing our conscious connection, our conscious link to the higher dimensions of the subtle, right? At the moment, for the majority of people, this is just a story. It doesn't even exist. They question subtle dimension. Religions talk about heaven and hell. They talk about something, but the majority of people don't even know what that is. They just imagine, because no one has that connection. Or some people go through various experiences, like they go suddenly out of the body, or they have out of the body experiences because of some sudden death or some other issues they may have, maybe being on an operation table. They may experience this kind of phenomena, but they create again something out of it within the scope of their own consciousness, within the scope of their religious or spiritual backgrounds. And so they say, okay, it's a proof that there is heaven, it's a proof there is hell, it's a proof there is this, it's a proof there is that. There's no such proof, because all the access is the collective realm of that emotional and intellectual residue that have been accumulated through the down cycle. So they don't have access to the higher frequency or existence of a higher frequency, because they haven't restored that connection within themselves. Many have no capacity to restore it because they just are devoid of that connection whatsoever. So different types of consciousness incarnate on this earth in this day and age. And because it's the age of dispersion, not everyone is a part of the original soul. Some of the beings are just a residue of the corrupt of the down cycle, kind of like through the down cycle, that whatever has been accumulated. We also misuse our creative, procreative energy through the down cycle. And that's why we create maybe more bodies than there are souls to host, right? And so there are many bodies, but maybe not so many potent beings in those bodies.